Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and comrades in between. TGM, Miklós Gáspár Tamás, was arguably one of, if not the most important Marxist thinkers in Hungary after the fall of the USSR. In this video, which I intend to be the first in a series of videos explaining important works of leftist theory, especially lesser known ones, I'd like to talk about what I view as one of his most important works, the analysis of post-fascism. His introductory writing on the topic, On Post-Fascism, written in 2000, is linked in the description, obviously, alongside the continuation that he wrote a decade later. Chapter 1, Citizenship and the Enlightenment. To understand what TGM means by post-fascism, we need to start with a brief history of the idea of citizenship as he presents it. Citizenship is a guarantee given to the citizen by the state that ensures at bare minimum, even in what TGM calls a stunted form, quote, a permitted presence and minimum chance of survival in a given territory at a given point of inhabited social space, unquote. Before the Enlightenment, citizenship, the active membership of the political community, was limited by race, class, gender, and a myriad of other arbitrary factors. Obviously, this in some way is still the case today. However, before the Enlightenment, this was not only de facto but also ideological. The Enlightenment equated citizenship with base human dignity, and after this it started to get expanded to all races, classes, genders, and creeds. In a dialectical materialist sense, the contradiction between citizenship being a base human dignity and that citizenship being denied to certain races, religions, genders, etc., caused a tension that was, and still is, being resolved by several civil rights movements. Crucially, this development of the Enlightenment is something that leftists and liberals basically agree on. The primary difference is that the left recognizes that legal equality is not the same as equal opportunity, and a class system will always make it harder or de facto impossible for those at the bottom to truly be full citizens. As TGM puts it, quote, for some, socialism seemed to be the straightforward continuation and enlargement of the Enlightenment project. For some, like Karl Marx, the completion of the project required a revolution, doing away with the appropriation of surplus value and an end to the social division of labor. But for all of them, it appeared fairly obvious that the merger of the human and the political condition was, simply, moral necessity. Unquote. Chapter 2, Fascism and the Dual State Model. According to TGM, in the 19th century, people started to realize that individual liberty is not all it's cracked up to be. We can put the development of Marxism, as described in the quote at the end of the previous chapter, as one answer to this. Liberalism achieved, at least to some extent, the individual on-paper rights of citizenship, but as it doesn't eliminate the class structure, the actual opportunity for most people just isn't there. As long as there is a bourgeois class above you, taking the value of your labor, you will never be able to take advantage of those rights, even if you have them on paper. Capital's interest is against yours, and it will do everything to take away your power to fight it. And of course, we have to note that most people didn't have those rights on paper either. Turns out old entrenched power structures can rarely, if ever, be fully replaced peacefully. Fascism was the other answer to this collapse of the Enlightenment. TGM argues that one of the most important elements of fascism was undoing the idea of the universal citizenship. Quote, Carl Schmitt was right on one fundamental point. The idea of universal citizenship contains an inherent contradiction in that the dominant institution of modern society, the nation-state, is both a universalistic and parochial, since territorial, institution. Liberal nationalism, unlike ethnicism or fascism, is limited, if you wish tempered, universalism. Fascism put an end to this shilly-shallying. The sovereign was judge of who does and does not belong to the civic community, and citizenship became a function of his, or its, transient decree. This hostility to universal citizenship is, I submit, the main characteristic of fascism. Unquote. To understand how the fascist state does this, let's familiarize ourselves with the concept of the dual state. The term was first coined by Ernst Fraenkel, a German Jewish lawyer, who used it to describe the Nazi regime in his book titled, well, The Dual State. It divides the state into two distinct parts. The first one is the normative state, which operates according to a set of rules and regulations. This is most of the regular, white, Aryan, whatever, German society in the Nazi state. They enjoy the usual protections of law, however harsh or unjust they may or may not be. There is a second part, the prerogative state. This is the part of the state that, quote, exercises unlimited arbitrariness and violence unchecked by any legal guarantee, unquote. Think of the Nazi political elite and paramilitary groups that are above the law and, as TGM describes it, the political minorities that are below or outside of it. As TGM argues, quote, since thanks to the Enlightenment, citizenship, membership of the political community, nationality, and humanity had been synthetically merged, being expelled from citizenship meant quite literally exclusion from humanity. Fascist or Nazi genocide was not preceded by legal condemnation, it was the naturalization of a moral judgment that deemed some type of human condition inferior, cutting the civic and human community in two. This is fascism. Unquote. Chapter 3. The non-states of the periphery and post-fascism. TGM argues that countries on the periphery, primarily he talks about Africa and ex-Soviet states, though I personally think we could arguably add Latin America and South Asia, basically the whole global south, to this list, effectively live without a state, in the sense of a state that provides the protections of citizenship to its citizens. Quote, the old creaking and unpopular nation-state, the only institution to date that had been able to grant civil rights, a modicum of social assistance, and some protection from the exactions of privateer gangs and rapacious, irresponsible business elites, ceased to exist or never even emerged in the majority of the poorest areas of the world. In most parts of sub-Saharan Africa and of the former Soviet Union, not only the refugees but the whole population could be considered stateless. The way back, after decades of demented industrialization, to a subsistence economy and natural barter exchanges in the midst of environmental devastation, where banditry seems to have become the only efficient method of social organization, leads exactly nowhere. People in Africa and ex-Soviet Eurasia are dying not by a surfeit of the state, but by the absence of it. Unquote. By stateless here, TGM means being under the prerogative state, de facto outside the protection of law. I'll give you a short, trivial example from my home country of Hungary. In the city of Sajó-Bábony, there is a chemical plant that recently went bankrupt. When this happens, according to the law here, the liquidation company that manages the process of closing down the factory takes over all legal responsibility as the employer. The workers have not received salaries for around 4 to 6 months as of the time of writing this, and have also not received their termination papers. This latter part is crucial, as without those, they cannot legally find new jobs, as they are technically still employed. Now, the law here is pretty black and white. The liquidation company has clearly committed a crime, yet nothing has happened. Neither the previous government nor the since-elected current one seems to care much about this issue, and no authority over the liquidator has stepped in or even answered the workers' requests. Think of the reverse, where a worker would so blatantly violate the legal agreement between them and their employer. If I don't go into work tomorrow, if I don't perform my work to the fullest of my abilities, if I even do a thing like not dress according to the dress code of my company, or if I, quote, behave in a manner unbecoming of the employer's reputation at or outside the workspace, unquote, actual quote from my current employment agreement, which is standard for all jobs I've had in my life, my employer can terminate or even fine me by garnishing my wages. Note that the Sajó-Bábony workers have not received their salaries or termination papers, even though it would be a legal obligation of the bourgeois class that controls their factory. However, they cannot find new jobs. The laws apply to them only in the sense that it's advantageous to the bourgeois class. Employers will regularly do things like this because they, the bourgeois, they enjoy the full protection of the law, while us, the proletariat, are part of the prerogative state. We may nominally have rights under the law, but if you are a person working for a chemical plant that also, by the way, illegally stores dangerous chemicals like phosgene that they supposedly should only store short-term and use immediately, you de facto don't have these rights. You don't have the opportunity to go up in a legal battle against a giant company, and even if you did, why would you? It will take years, lots of money you don't have, and even if you reach a resolution, and even if that goes in your favor, according to Hungarian law, If the company no longer has the money to pay your salary, the liquidation company will not be responsible for it. So if they just draw it out long enough, they don't have to pay you anything, even if you win. You can also think of LGBTQ rights in Hungary, like how in 2025, the right to assembly, a fundamental human right, has been violated and is since currently being violated by a law on the books that de facto banned the 30th Budapest Pride Parade. And the current government that since replaced the far-right Orbán one that passed this law, well, they promised to hold a national referendum on it, so that every Hungarian citizen can vote to decide whether queer Hungarians deserve the basic human rights that they have. Truly a liberal revolution. You can think of the Roma minority, people who are so far outside the normative state that the neo-Nazi party's members can send vigilantes to hunt and harass them for crimes without trial, without any presence of legality, and even the big city liberal elite will only nod in sage agreement that this is a necessary evil. We wish the government gave the police more money so that the neo-Nazi gangs didn't feel the need to do all this. Because as every liberal knows, a stronger police state always stops violence towards racial minorities. This, according to TGM, is post-fascism. Reversing the Enlightenment's universal citizenship idea through non-violent means. If your country is exploited by international corporations for cheap wages and non-existent labor laws, that is to say, if you are de facto stateless, with no state protecting you from the ravages of capital, even if nominally there is one present, you can't even rise up properly in post-fascist systems. They don't need to shoot you, they don't even necessarily need the police to beat you up. Capital will just quietly leave the country, move to an area where the state is even weaker. It is a slightly nicer form of the outright open fascism of decades past and, sadly, even still the present, but ultimately achieves similar ends. All your protest will achieve is capital flight and the condemnation of international agencies and institutions like the IMF disapproving of your nation and demanding you undo every progress you've had with so-called structural adjustments if you want them to loan you even a modicum of the wealth the empire has extracted from your nation. It is a bureaucratic form of violence, the one described by Foucault's biopolitics and then Mbembe's necropolitics, one that is impersonal, not vengeful or hateful, one that can pretend it is not killing you, just letting you die. As TGM puts it, quote, post-fascism does not need to put non-citizens into freight trains to take them into death. Instead, it needs only prevent the new non-citizens from boarding any trains that might take them into the happy world of overflowing rubbish bins that could feed them. Post-fascist movements everywhere, but especially in Europe, are anti-immigration movements, grounded in the homogeneous worldview of productive usefulness. They are not simply protecting racial and class privileges within the nation-state, although they are doing that too, but protecting universal citizenship within the rich nation-state against the virtual universal citizenship of all human beings, regardless of geography, language, race, denomination, and habits. The current notion of human rights might defend people from the lawlessness of tyrants, but it is no defense against the lawlessness of no rule. Unquote. I specifically brought up my country of Hungary as opposed to a place like Palestine, or even Latin America, I suppose, is because post-fascism is a subtle process. Where capital can, or has to, it doesn't refrain from overt violence and genocide, even in the supposedly civilized end of history 21st century. TGM's theory on post-fascism is a warning for us that even when the guns stop firing and the war criminals are dead or gone, when the goose-stepping Nazis no longer roam the street, the same structures remain, built into a neoliberal facade, still stripping you of your title as citizen, and thus your right to any protection from capital. Thank you for watching. Feel free to comment suggestions for improvement on this format, or your favorite soup recipe. I will read every single comment. If you want to support me, like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. If you have money to spare, send it to a charity that helps Palestinians or other victims of imperialism. Thank you for your time, and I will see you next time.